As you know, I've been looking forward to this game, and I'm so glad it's here now. I swear, no word of a lie, on the night of the 24th, I was having trouble sleeping, I was so excited. I passed out eventually and woke up about 3:30ish on Friday morning, and then just jumped right onto the PlayStation where I spent about an hour and 20 minutes making the character. Then I finally, played the game. We're going to split this review into two parts. The first part, I'm going to be on my hands and knees praising the various things I love about this game. The second part is going to be in the opposite way. We're going to talk about the shit in this game that fucks me off, to put that as academically as I possibly can. So let's just get right into it, and here's part one. Part one. In this latest outing by FromSoftware, we play as a tarnished who has risen from their grave with the shattering of the Elden Ring. Our job is to seek the throne to become Elden Lord, and somehow this will stop the world from dying. That's my present understanding of things in the game. It being a FromSoftware title, the narrative is less in your face and more open to interpretation. We start the game, we're introduced to the first boss, but we're supposed to lose to this boss, so yeah, it's just one of those fights that you're not meant to win, which is always a bit demoralising. It's not a good start to the game when you're immediately killed by something. I don't know, maybe I'm just tired of these as a trope in RPGs. Anyway, we're then let loose into the tutorial area, although this whole area is completely optional. You can skip it if you like, which is quite nice, especially if you're confident in FromSoftware games. You feel like you can just go on and do it. Brilliant. But if you're not, it's definitely worth going through because there are a lot of new mechanics in Elden Ring that this area will tell you about. Anyway, past the tutorial section, whether you skipped it or went through it, it doesn't matter. We emerge from the dark underground and we're greeted with a beautiful view, seeing the giant tree in the sky above us and the rolling fields before us, distant ruins promising hours of adventure, and even an optional boss prowling around. It's all quite awe-inspiring really. I literally just stopped to take in the view when I first emerged from the darkness. It's a beautiful looking game. Like most FromSoftware games, not the most graphically impressive, but it's got a very strong art direction which I love. As much as that tree sentinel dude, that boss who's wandering around, is a bit of a prick to fight, he does have a valuable role in the game. He shows us that a lot of bosses in this game don't have arenas that they're confined to, you just encounter them in the open world. In contrast to FromSoftware's earlier works, Elden Ring has got open world, and usually that generates naught but concern for me, especially in this sort of case. Because to go open world, you need to have things to put in that open world, and sometimes game devs seem to miss this little point. So when they go from creating typically linear experiences to trying to build a big open world, they end up abandoning one of the things that made their older games so good, without replacing it with anything. Elden Ring, I'm happy to say, mostly does it right. The environment is bloody huge and absolutely breathtaking. And shortly after starting you get a horse and discover that the fast travel system in this game, unlike most of the fast travel systems that have appeared in FromSoftware's previous works, doesn't suck eggs this time. It's got more in common with a more traditional fast travel system that you might find in any other open world RPG. You discover fast travel points as you explore, and you can just bring up the map and teleport to them whenever you please, so long as you're not in combat anyway. And let's quickly talk about the map. This is my map at the time of writing this script. It's huge. Compare it to the map of my second character, who's only just started the game. Look how it grows, and it just keeps growing and adding to itself the more I explore, which I absolutely love. One of my favourite things to do in this game is to just summon my lovely horse and go on long journeys into the wilderness just to see what adventure I stumble onto. From seeing an army of dudes pouncing on random T-Rex dogs to dodging the ballista that fires at me as I approach distant capitals, just exploring the world was fun and engaging. Speaking of the horse, Torrent is his name, and he's one of the most significant additions to gameplay if you ask me. You can summon him most of the time just by using an item. He has a nifty double jump and can run quite fast, and you can attack from horseback. So if an enemy is giving you trouble, all you gotta do is summon Torrent, hop on his back, and ride by beat them to death. It's wonderful. It won't work all the time, granted, but it's a handy enough get out of fuck up free card. You cannot use him in certain instances, like some boss fights they won't let you use him, and some areas like inside the castle, he's not accessible. You also can't summon him whilst engaging in multiplayer, which that last one's a little bit of a downer, but for the most part, I really like having a horse. I didn't think this would be a feature I really would enjoy or that I'd use a lot, but I'm wrong, I use him all the time, it's bloody brilliant. I want to say though, even if it has its issues like the lack of horsey, the multiplayer in this game is much better than I've seen in any FromSoftware title. Aside from the occasional server issue, which I asked around online and it seems to be hitting others a lot harder than it hits me, so I'm probably one of the luckier ones, although seriously, I do feel bad for the people who haven't been able to engage in the multiplayer who really want to. Hopefully that all gets sorted soon. I will argue though, it's kind of a good problem for the game to have that the servers are so full that lots of people want to play the game, rather than, the game being empty and dead. But ultimately, my point that I was trying to make was that the multiplayer in this game is much less of a pain in the arse. You still need items to engage with it, but the player looking to be the host and to summon other players into their world needs only one item and it's easy enough to craft, and the areas being huge mean that the multiplayer sessions can go on for longer. You still lose your summoned allies when you beat an area boss, but that's okay because it's quick enough just to summon them right back. And with the password system still in place from like Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne, you can easily enough just summon your friends, it's fantastic. And when you're playing as a summon and you're helping a host get through their world, you can still benefit from things like enemy item drops. See, when you kill an enemy and they drop an item, usually only the host can pick it up in a FromSoftware game, but this time around, even the summon can get something out of it, it's quite nice. And it's not like if the summon picks it up, the host can't, you can both get a reward from it, which I quite like. And whilst the summoned player cannot make progress in their own world, they can only do what the host is doing, you still get plenty of rewards from being the summoned player, it's quite nice. You don't just get a couple of souls and an ember and then you're pushed on your way. You can adventure through the land gathering all sorts of nifty little things before you return to your world. Also, talking about crafting real quick, you can buy a crafting kit really early on and this lets you, well, lets you craft shit, that's kind of what it's for. And there are various cookbooks in the world that add new crafting recipes, so you're always expanding the things you can build. It's a very nice feature, as is the stealth mechanic. Being able to crouch walk and sneak through thickets to get the perfect jump on the enemy was just lovely. My buddy Alex, who is a different Alex from the one I did the first Firewatch video with.
So are you even going to make the second video?
Oh fuck, right, I forgot about that, I'll need to do it later. Anyway, that other Alex was able to build her Assassin Dex character from Dark Souls 3, only a much more effective version this time around. And once I introduced him to power stancing, things only got better. If you played Dark Souls 2, then you probably remember what power stance is. Basically, it was when you had the same weapon type in either hand, like you'd have a long sword in either hand or two axes, it unlocks special attacks with your L1 button, which would usually be for shielding. Which in all the other games just make you awkwardly hold your weapon in a sort of defensive position, and I don't get that, that doesn't look good. Power stancing was one of Dark Souls 2's good ideas, and it's a shame that it only really returned now. It's taken way too long to get back to that. Speaking of guarding, shields feel a lot more reliable this time, although maybe it's just because you start the game with a much longer stamina bar so you can block more. But one of the neatest features is the guard counter. Basically, if you block an attack, you can follow up with a heavy attack, which acts as a guard counter and it stuns most standard enemies and just deals a fuck ton of damage. It's brilliant. It's like a parry mechanic for people like me who struggle with timing. It's a lovely thing to be able to do. Though here's my elite pro advice, make sure you remember the enemy attack chain so that you can do the guard counter right at the end and not halfway through when they're still doing their attacks. Because most of them won't stagger when they're hitting your shields like they usually do. And that could lead to you trying to do the guard counter too early, which leads to you taking a meaty biff to the face and having to use a healing item. On the subject of healing items, like in Dark Souls 3, you get two flasks at the beginning of the game, one that restores your health and one that restores your focus, which is basically your mana. One of the niftiest features about the healing flasks in this game is you don't need to rest to get them back. If you kill groups of enemies as you explore, you get a refill to both your flasks, which is nice. It means the adventure gets to keep going without you needing to rest at a checkpoint every 5 minutes and respawn all the enemies. Though I will say, resting at checkpoints is a lot more useful in this game. Like in Dark Souls 1, you can level up from your checkpoints, which is a mechanic I've really missed. I don't have to go back to a disconnected hub world just to get some power into me. Like in the Dark Souls games, when you're at a checkpoint you can choose what spells you want to have equipped, but you can also upgrade your flasks from here without again having to go to a completely different area. And you can choose the amount of charges each flask gets. You can also apply skills to your weapons or just pass the time to see what changes in the world around you. See, Elden Ring has a day-night cycle and some of the bosses and enemies only appear at night. Like this Night Cavalry bloke and his horse, I think they look pretty badass. There's also this one dude who turns into a red phantom if you try to talk to him after the sun goes down. Not sure why, but it was still pretty cool to fight him. There's a lot of cool stuff in this game. You can charge your spells so they hit harder. You can change the entire appearance and name of your character whenever you feel like once you unlock the hub world. There's a ton of side dungeons to explore which all offer useful rewards. And for the most part, the world has a lot of variety to it. Go east for a while and the land sort of sets on fire. Go north for long enough and you've come across a mystical lake. Head down to the south to see a castle where the staff are getting beaten up by the commoners. Or maybe just hang around the starting area and pick flowers, it's all up to you. Also, a quick note on jumping, it doesn't suck anymore. Finally, FromSoft gets jumping right in one of their games.
Wait, didn't they get that in another game? You know, the samurai game that was published in part by the abuse company Activision and I see why you ignore it.
I never would have thought that all of these elements, the open world and the horse, the stealth system and the decent jumping would all work so well in a Souls-like, but they really do. This game is mostly amazing and I absolutely adore playing it. I'm not looking forward to next week because I won't be talking about it again. That's a shame, I'll have to play something else. So, despite what is coming next, I need you to notice I love this game, okay? Cool. Now, the criticisms.
R2.
To the yin comes the yang. We've spoken about how much I love the game and all the amazing elements that go together to make it what it is. I even forgot to mention some of the things that I really like the bosses I saw were mostly pretty cool, and how most of them you could just run away from if you really were outmatched, or just sneak past if you couldn't be bothered to deal with them. But, I'd be lying if I said the game was a flawless masterpiece. It isn't. My first and what is probably my biggest gripe with the game is that, like in other Souls games, you have to collect currency from defeated foes which you use to level up. The system itself is fine, I'm not complaining that that's how you get XP, it's a fair system. The issue comes into play when you realise that most enemies just don't drop enough currency. Given the openness of the map, it can be quite a while between each enemy encounter, and to only get like 1,000 runes or so from a group can be quite demoralising. Every so often you'll find an enemy with glowing eyes who drops slightly more runes, but for the most part, it seems to be a bit of a recession when it comes to the currency of this game. And what's worse about this is, it makes the moments when you lose even small numbers of runes more of a pain. If I die in Dark Souls and lose, say, 20,000 souls in that game, I no longer care. That amount isn't even close to what I need to level up any one of my main characters. That's pocket change. If I lose 1,500 in Elden Ring, it's a pain in the ass because enemies are stingy as fuck, and unless you constantly use the one item that increases the rate at which runes drop, you're basically just fighting for pocket change, but pocket change you need nonetheless because you don't want to spend hours getting it all back. Even some of the bosses are a bit thrifty with their rune drops, it's annoying. I take down a giant magma-breathing dragon who's holding a giant greatsword. Cool looking boss by the way, even if he is bloody recycled. And I get maybe enough runes to buy the Elden Ring equivalent of a Mars bar. And this has been happening to me since pretty much the early game. Even the first boss I found out in the world didn't seem to drop many runes. In any Dark Souls game, I can kill a boss and unless it's really late game, they'll almost always drop enough souls for me to get a couple of levels out of. Elden Ring? Not so much. Again, it feels like there's something of a recession going on in this land. Let's stay on the subject of bosses for a minute. There is just way too much recycling of bosses in this game, it's just infuriating. I thought it was bad enough when this boss that I met in a dungeon earlier started to reappear in other dungeons, and then later again in the overworld. It's a shame he's got a cool design. He looks a lot like a werewolf that's gone feral or just didn't quite make it to be a full werewolf, but he becomes less interesting because I keep seeing him. Then take these tree monsters, they kind of remind me of the old Stray and Asylum demons from the original Dark Souls. I think mostly it's that fantastic boot hair. Each of these big trees seem to have one at the base. No variance between each of the bosses, not even the slightest colour change. They are all identical. Fuck, I'd have settled for one just having a necktie just for some sense of variety. Do you know what's more interesting than seeing the same thing over and over again? Literally anything. Then take this big dragon lizard dude. He's the one I was mentioning earlier. He kinda reminds me of my sister's lizard. It's another case of him looking like a really cool boss. However, he's recycled as well. I first discovered him in a cave to the north. I thought he was pretty impressive. However, I then saw a post on Facebook, someone was asking for help to defeat that very same monster, and I thought, ooh, this'll be interesting. Only to discover that they were talking about a copy-paste of him down to the south. Although, to the game's absolute credit, at least the copy-paste version, you know, didn't have a second phase. I mean, I guess that counts as creativity. And whilst I love the soldier design in this game, they look more traditionally medieval European this time around. The exact same dudes appear everywhere, only with very minor variations on their outfit. It's usually the colour. Maybe the helmet looks slightly different, but that's about it. The best part about the armors in Dark Souls games is that they were all really unique. They often acted as a visual representation of their land of origin, and you would rarely confuse one set with another. Not in Elden Ring though, which wouldn't be so bad, but outside of enemy drops I found very few armor sets, same goes for weapons as well. One of the downsides of an open world approach is that the cool shit ends up being separated by 90-mile hikes. But you know, at least they made an effort to make the armor sets in this game look different from previous FromSoftware titles, and that counts for something. They didn't just copy-paste them. Which is nice because they seem to have copy-pasted a hell of a lot of other things. Listen, I'm not gonna rail on the return of a lot of the same weapons because A, we get plenty of new ones and variations on older weapons, and B, most of the returning weapons are just typical melee weapons you'd expect to see in any fantasy RPG, which is forgivable. I will, however, rail on the fact that some enemies, particularly the giant crabs, rats and dogs, are just Dark Souls 3 enemies with a slightly different skin. I know what some will say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but I will say, things can always be improved upon. Or maybe I'll just say don't make excuses for their laziness. That's the thing about Elden Ring, it's a paradox of a game. See this land octopus here, and that giant lobster there. See their new take on the giants with their new movesets and abilities. Look at these massive walking buildings with bells for bellends. Look at the sheer creativity and explain to me, please explain, why the fuck these gargoyles share the same moveset as the Frown enemies from Dark Souls 3, and why do we see patches again? Miyazaki is way too proud of this character. Look mate, I get it. I'm way too proud of my Brooks character here they are, but I don't shove them into everything I do. Patches isn't as cool as you think he is, I couldn't murder him fast enough. I also want to get some hate on for the fog walls that separate sections of the land and stop us from going into dungeons whilst in multiplayer. Meaning that when I'm playing with friends we have to be constantly desummoning and resummoning just to play with each other. 3 steps forward and 2 steps back is still 1 step forward I suppose. At least PvP seems to be less of a thing now. I've encountered a total of 3 invaders. One me and my nephew dispatched fairly simply. The other one couldn't get to me before I got to Godric's boss room. Ha, sucker. And the third one was an encounter that I had with my friend Alex whilst playing the game last night. Last night at time of talking anyway. The invader killed my buddy, but I managed to kill the invader even though they killed me at the same time. But you know, at least they just came at us and didn't try to lure us into enemies. So maybe some honour's been restored. Look at me talking about honour in a video game. Speaking of Godric, it only took me 3 tries to beat him. Though I fully admit that I used 2 summons and they were really good at the game, so you know, props to them, I love those 2. But anyway, moving on. I'm also a little bit bitter about not being able to use your horse in multiplayer, though I suppose I kind of understand it, so I can't really be too mad. I'm also not so keen on those dungeons that I mentioned earlier. I like that they all contain neat rewards, but they're just not very interesting to explore. I've only seen 2 types so far, catacombs and caves, and whilst the layouts change, you can't really do much with either, so it's a little bit boring to actually be in them. Though I'll be honest, I don't really hate them. It's kind of nice just to have things to do sometimes when I'm wandering around the world. I'll get off my horse and think, oh, there's a dungeon there, maybe there's something cool inside. Often I'd find some ashes of war, which I completely forgot to talk about. There are 2 types of ashes in this game. One type of ash are the ashes that you apply to your weapon, which can change the inherent weapon skill, which is quite good. You can find one that works more for your playstyle this way. You can also remove certain skills from things like shields. You can take away the parry ability to be able to use your weapon skill without having to two-hand it. And the other ashes are monsters that you summon to sort of distract enemies. It's quite cool, especially for solo players like me. Can't use them everywhere, but you can use them often enough and they're just a nice addition to the game. These are both just really cool things and I like them. And there is a nice lady in the hub that gives you hugs that give you usable buffs. There's also this cool Jar Warrior dude that pleasantly reminds me of the Onion Bro. There's just so much cool stuff in this game that I really love.
Wow sis, you know what you've done here? Rather than devolving from complimenting to complaining, you've somehow gone the other way and gone from moaning to praising. Shit, you really like this game, don't you?
I do, I really do. Whilst Elden Ring definitely has issues, it's a really, really good game that I absolutely adore. I'm still playing it now. I'm probably playing it right now as you're listening to this video. I really shouldn't be, because I've got to write next week's script and think of what video I'm doing next week. But I'm definitely not. I'm definitely playing Elden Ring, which is a very good game.
Conclusion.
Elden Ring is a phenomenal game and one that I adore, just one that I want to keep playing. I'm really having a good time with it. My main character already had 30 hours on her playtime by the end of the weekend, and I've only racked up more since then. I was trying to stick to the critical path so I could sort of get through it and do the review proper, but I kept getting distracted and wandering off into the wilderness because that was always fun to do. It's a deeply immersive game and one that I find to be largely more accessible than previous FromSoftware titles. What with co-op being less of a pain to engage in, and how with many times avoiding battles is an option. Even my buddy who doesn't really care for Souls games said he'd be interested in giving it a go. I won't call Elden Ring a masterpiece because I'm not a pretentious twat. I will just say it's a fucking fantastic game. I absolutely loved this game and I do highly recommend it. Though I do have one more quibble that I have to sort of throw towards the PS5. It's not really a problem with a game, it's the PS5 this time. PS5, why did you download this game and just have it on the home screen, you know, before I could even play the bloody thing, before it even released? Was it just to taunt me?
What? No. Would I do that to you?
Yes. Yes, you fucking would.